Are you in Boston area? Where specifically are you?
Yeah, I'm in Williamstown, Massachusetts. I teach American Studies at Williams College, so Western Massachusetts.
Okay, all right. I have so many questions. You were saying thank you for the invite early on, and dude, I have to tell you, I hounded UNC Press for this book like so freaking much. I do a lot of UNC Press's books. Like I got like I'm friends with a lot of the people. Like they publish a lot like in the native South, so I grew up like, kind of like as a scholar reading their stuff, and I got to know them. And I was at the AHA in San Francisco like earlier this year, and they had your book like
Mhm.
on display, and I could not like stop looking at this cover. Like I was like, can I have it? Let me bring it home. And
Yeah.
they said no. And they never say no to me, like ever. I mean, they sent a copy in the mail, right? But I was like, I need this now. I was so eager to like jump in and read your book, and I'm so excited to talk to you about this because it's we were just talking about before we logged on. I had to like restart my computer. It was like, well, there's your data issue right now to start and so forth. So, dude, I am so excited for you to be here and also to talk about this movie. Uh,
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
well, okay, so we were, as people know, like I usually ask the guests, hey, what movie do you want to talk about? Because it's not so much important if people like a movies or whatever movie it is, so much as like you like talking about the movie. And we were talking about a couple different ideas, and you said sneakers, and I was like, fuck yes, absolutely, let's go. So I sat down, and of all people, I'm talking to my ex-wife the other night. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing sneakers. She's like, that's my favorite movie. I'm like, I know, Christine. I know. She's like, I was like, this is my podcast. It's not yours. So thank you for letting me go down that nostalgia lane. Uh, you know,
Anytime.
well, I'm keeping one of her children hostage here at my house over the summer, so there's that. So, but before we get in, you want to maybe introduce yourself a little bit to our audience and crowd and so forth, and we'll kind of jump in.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Brian Michael Murphy. The book that you were just talking about, We the Dead, it was my first book. Um, Took me a long time to write it, but it was a lot of fun too. And it took me a lot of different places. So one of the things I tried to do in the book was not just write about the archival artifacts that I found to build my argument, but also try to tell the story of what it was like to go to those archives, because so much of what I was writing about was really about how we treat these artifacts, our relationships to data, and all the forms that it can take, from paper to microfilm to digital and all that. So, so right now, teaching American Studies at Williams College, and my PhD was actually interdisciplinary. So I've been a media studies professor before. I've been an interdisciplinary studies professor at other places. And so, yeah, I'm really enjoying being here. You were asking about Boston. I spend a little time in Cambridge because I have an appointment at a research center there at Harvard, the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. And I really love to write, and I've always loved movies. There was a time where if you asked me, around the time that sneakers came out, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, uh, I probably would have said something related to writing, and I may have even said like film director or something like that, because I was just so into movies. And you know, um, I don't know how old you are, but I'm assuming
About to be
you.
47.
Yeah, yeah. So you were around back then too, in the early '90s. When I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I remember going to the movies once a week at least for like several years. And granted, I probably wasn't as discerning as I am now, but 80-90% of those movies were at least very enjoyable, and many of them were incredible. And I still revisit them. Part of it's nostalgia, but part of it was the craft, part of it was true artists also deeply desiring to please their audience, and seeing that as a part of the art, which is sort of where I find myself now as an artist, as a scholar. It's like I've written scholarly work. I've written sort of obscure, avant-garde experimental poems. I've done all that kind of fun stuff. And now I'm like, I want to take on the challenge of telling a story. It's like writing a pop song, right? People hear pop music and like, oh, that's easy. Anybody could do that. Well, when you sit down to write a good pop song, it is not easy to do. Walking the tightrope of cliche and
Mm.
making people feel something. So that's sort of where I'm at, and that's sort of what I was it is a UNC Press book. It is a scholarly book that has a lot of archival research informing it. But I wanted to infuse as much as possible the sense that stories were being told, and the sense that there was a person, at the heart of it, discovering these things. And then everything that I wrote about, all the data I was writing about, also was connected to real people. So that was
Well,
the goal.
well, okay. So first of all, I spent the last like 3 days combing through your book, like just tearing into it. I got real excited. I started reading it, and we're going into. I'm going to ask you more about Iron Mountain in a bit, but it was
Yeah.
such a fun like intro into the book, and you're talking about like your own interdisciplinarity, and it was like it's obvious that you say that now because it's like you're coming at this book with all these really cool different angles.
Mm.
As I'm reading through this. Um, and you talk about like your love of film and stuff like that. Dude, I in my early 20s, like once I got my like personal freedom, I'm going like 2-3 times a week,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And the HATM thing that I do now, this whole thing, like kind of came just as a byproduct of like growing up. But the more I've thought about like my own path to becoming a historian and stuff like that, was infused by a love of like when you watch like Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all this stuff, like it's all storytelling,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all really telling histories, right? Star Wars starts off a long time ago, a galaxy far, far away, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, this is a history of a conflict, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Um, so I get you, right? Like right there. It's so much work. And writing, you talk about like the love of writing, which comes through, by the way, in the book, like so much, right? All we're doing is telling stories.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like we could have talked about a whole bunch of different movies. If maybe I'll get
Yeah.
you back on here if
Yeah.
you want,
Yeah.
because yeah, absolutely. Um, I want to talk about this movie, the Sneakers, because you said this, and it's come up. Like a lot of people have asked about this to be on HATM. Like so many people, like, are you? When are you going to cover? This is like one of those films that it's not a huge film, but people, I don't know, maybe other historians dig it. I don't know if it's just people who are kind of, who dig this kind of stuff, nerdy. I don't know. There's a love for this movie, man. And like
Mm-hmm.
sitting back down to watch it the other night, I hadn't seen this in probably a couple decades, but it's
Yeah.
always been in my mind.
Yeah.
So I guess the question I got for you is like, of all the films we could have talked about,
Yeah.
you picked this one. Why Sneakers?
Well, it's simultaneously beloved, and it's sort of unsung. There are a lot of people who really really love it, and there are a lot of people who've never even heard of it. And the cast, the first thing is the cast is just unbelievable.
Ridiculous.
And it's only become the casting has only become more resonant over time. I'm not like a cold person, but I generally am not one to sort of emote very much about the passing of celebrities, right? Because I don't know them, and they're just not really in my life in that way. But and I know people do often like take to Twitter and say, today we lost, and I get that, right? Like I
Sure.
understand that. It's just not how I usually respond to those things if I didn't know the person. But River Phoenix, I mean, the the course of at least American film history, if he had lived, because he's all
Yeah.
over Leonardo DiCaprio's corner, he's taken roles from Brad Pitt. I mean, everything, all these other movies that we could talk about on this podcast from the 90s that are probably important to both me and you, that whole landscape would have looked different if he had lived. So when I watch this, you watch this or you watch the opening minutes of Last Crusade, and
Yeah.
it's just like crushing because he was so fantastic. And he's minor. He's the most minor of the ensemble,
Mhm.
right? So
He's almost comic relief in this film.
totally. He's a totally comical character. He's not a computer expert, at least at the level of the other guys, right? What he hacked the school computer to change his grade, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of it. The ensemble cast. The other thing about this movie, and rather than, I mean, we'll talk about it thematically and all those things and go wherever you want to go, but one of the things that's when I rewatched it, one of the things that really stuck with me was just how smart it is from a craft perspective. And I think that's the thing that sort of makes it resonate with people, because there are a lot of gadgets in this movie, right? Maybe some of the weaknesses of the movie are some of the easy fixes that the gadget allows them to do.
Mhm.
But they don't do that every time. And they sort of balance that out with these surprising moments of storytelling. So for instance, when they're trying to break into Janek's office to get the black box, there's this keypad. And Sidney Poitier, the ex-CIA guy, says, oh, those things are unbeatable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Dan Aykroyd, the conspiracy theorist, says, oh, I have this thing from a buddy of mine who was in Desert Storm. He was on the other side, of course. But and they flip to it. And they start telling Robert Redford over the phone how to do it. They don't let you hear what's being said. So you just get Robert Redford, uh-huh. And, Robert Redford's beautiful. So you can just look at him saying, over and over. And it's captivating. So he does this series of, yeah, got it. Okay, I'll try it. And then he just kicks it open. Right? This has happened in other movies. It's in The Last Boy Scout. Bruce Willis does a similar thing. That was later. So there are moments like that where it's just like, you didn't have to make us laugh there. You didn't have to like introduce yet one more challenge and one more obstacle for them to get what they want. But they just took these moments and they tell you something about the character. They tell you something about how smart these guys are, and they communicate something about the care that went into making the film. And they get you to these moments like David Strathairn driving the van blind and them communicating, Robert Redford guiding him through. I mean, it's just brilliant stuff. It's on the level of that great Spielberg stuff, that great George Lucas stuff, where it's just, they're like, we know we need to get them in the van. What is the most interesting way, without being too over the top, or maybe being over the top? If it's good, it's good though. How can we get them from the rooftop into the van? And that's the name of the game. You ask the question, how can we make it better? You crank it, you distill it. And then, there's just things we've never seen before. I mean, I don't know can you recall a movie where they said, first of all, there's a thermal sensor that we've got to beat. And then we're going to beat the thermal sensor by raising the temperature of the room to 98.6 degrees. Combined with Robert Redford, to beat the motion sensor, he has to move at like no more than 2 inches per second.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this beautiful symmetry where you've got that scene juxtaposed with the opening scene where it's all rush. The alarm goes off. They got to get over the barricade before it all. So there are just things like that about it that are so beautiful. And then just one last thing.
Please.
James Horner, the score. The first time I looked at the movies he had done, I'm like, oh, this guy scored my whole consciousness for my entire adolescence. Legends of the Fall, Glory. I mean, even like cult weird stuff. Like there was a sci-fi film, Crawl, with like Liam
with the star. I never figured out how he could how he could fight with that.
Yeah.
It looked cool, but like, how do you hold the thing?
Yeah, the glaive. Yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, should my dad have showed me this movie at 5 years old? I don't know, but he did, and then it was formative, So when you look at like the way that he's able to make you feel about the characters and about the moment, I think that his score is actually a huge part of why this movie stays with us.
Okay. So I usually said, I think people know, like, I usually kind of give people like, this has never been like a gotcha podcast or anything like that. Right. Like, so I always kind of want, and folks come in and are like, hey, this is a general idea of stuff we're going to talk about. And I, kind of write some stuff, and the things you're hitting on are like my whole notes here that I'm taking. I'm like, Branford Mars, is this a 90s film? Right.
This movie, I hacked your notebook. Yeah.
Oh, see, it wouldn't surprise me. After watching this film, like now I'm just like looking around. I should probably announce that I do work for the federal government. So people that want to work check out the forests out here in Colorado. I felt okay. You were talking about like that whole bit where Redford is like sneaking in, right? Where they got the temperature controlled room and all this stuff, and I'm like, did Mission Impossible lift from this movie? The Tom Cruise one? I mean, were you not getting those vibes when you were watching that scene over again?
It may have. I mean, it's possible. It's a small universe, right? Before the Marvel universe, right? There was the American paranoid thriller universe, right? And it's, you've got Redford in this movie, and he's basically playing an older version, a kind of like older version of his 3 Days of the Condor character to some degree, right?
Absolutely.
And then you've got, it's not as tight as like Gene Hackman in Enemy of the State a few years later, reaching back to the conversation. But, maybe that's also something that was, sort of a sneakers type move, right? To bring that character back. And then you've got on the production side, right? You've got, probably my favorite movie of all time, uh, The Firm, which, is directed by Sidney Pollack, who directed, uh,
The Firm, right here, dude.
who directed 3 Days of the Condor, right? So, and then you've got, there's just so many like interlinkages, and everybody who makes those movies, of course, knows those movies, but they don't just know
Mm-hmm.
them. They're working on a psychological sector of the American populace that I think to do it right takes a really, really deep understanding of things. And so you got movies like The Parallax View with Beatty, which is also in this vein, and that's a beautiful movie. It's shot like it's just gorgeously shot. I don't remember it was Gordon Willis or Haskell Wexler or one of those, like one of the great Conrad Halls, one of those greats.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember who, but it's not a fun movie. It's not fun. It's
No.
beautiful, but Sneakers somehow manages to get in there, and you have so much fun watching it, even though what you're watching is like terrifying. It's not easy to do.
Well, I think that's the brilliance of this film, right? It's like I was trying to think of, obviously Redford's our protagonist here, right?
Yeah.
Um, this film is so everybody in this movie is so likable,
Yeah.
and like you're saying, there's these great moments of levity. The door scene is one of my
Mhm.
favorite scenes in the entire thing, but there's so many of them.
Yeah.
At the same time, they're able to go from these moments of levity to where there's an undercurrent here
Yeah.
of real danger
Hmm.
when you look at like what's going on here as far as like, wait a second, the United States isn't looking to spy on Russia here. They want to read everybody else's mail.
Hmm.
And what does this say about the state? All of these different things. It's like it is this curveball of a dark film in
Hmm.
so many different ways that you're just like you kind of lulled into because it's fun. I couldn't help when I'm watching this over again. I watched it with my 12-year-old the other day, and I was like, I just love this cast so much. Like, I just want to hang out with these guys. Like the River Phoenix characters is like, oh, this is who I want to be because I'm probably 15 when this movie comes out in '92. So
Hmm.
Phoenix is 5, 6, 7 years older than I am at this
Yep.
point in time, somewhere in that line. He's early
Yep.
20s, right?
21,
I'm
22.
looking up to him, right?
Mhm.
I just want to hang out with these guys. There's even Aykroyd,
Yeah.
who
Yeah, totally.
is, yeah, is this Aykroyd playing kind of, I don't know. I don't know that I've seen Aykroyd quite like this before, where he's just
Hmm.
like, where Poitier's like, I can't talk to you anymore. Just do your job, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I think this is the first time I ever saw Poitier on screen.
Okay.
Like, I knew Sidney Poitier,
Yeah.
right, when I'm 15 in the early 90s,
Hmm.
but I never watched Poitier
Yeah.
before. So
Yeah.
so when I watch him, I'm like, okay, I know this guy is supposed to be something to me. I don't have the intellectual library of films in my head yet to
Mm.
understand who this guy is or why it's a big deal that him and Redford are together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we
And
haven't even said Ben Kingsley's name.
I mean, there's so, I mean, Mary McDonnell is just dazzling, just
President Rosalind,
dazzling,
man.
huh?
Right. That's President Rosalind from,
I mean, there's so many people in it. The other thing about Sneakers is I think it taps
yes.
into there's this early 90s moment. One of the things I write about in my book is time capsules, right? And time capsules conceptually are a snapshot of a moment. And some of the people that are in this film, they're cast so perfectly. Timothy Busfield, the red hair guy, plays one of the fake NSA agents, right? He's in Field of Dreams as the annoying brother-in-law. He's like, you got to
Mm-hmm.
sell the farm, right? Later comes along, and you think like you see him in this, you see him in that, and you're like, oh, this guy he's just always annoying. He's always trouble. And then he shows how great of an actor he is when he comes onto West Wing, and he's just like the coolest, like
Love
smartest,
West
just
Wing.
the opposite of all of that, and it's so he's in there, and again, he's not a major character. I mean, he plays an important role, but he doesn't have a lot of screen time. So just all those choices, and then you have these giants like Portier who, yeah, like you said, playing with Dan Aykroyd, they have this great chemistry, just everywhere you turn. So
Yeah. Speaking of snapshots, I'm already in my head thinking about like I'm dying to talk to you about another film at some point in time.
Mhm.
Singles comes out in 1992 as
Oh
well.
yeah,
You talk about a
yeah.
snapshot in time. Like
Uh-huh.
that's so much. Busfield gets maybe in my mind like the best quote of the film, right? When he's like, "Oh, when Redford's like, you guys are the other guys on the other end of the line," and
Oh yeah,
Busfield's like, "No, that's the FBI." You know, like, "No, that's the CIA." It's like, "Oh, okay, we don't trust anybody in this movie, right?" And
yeah, yeah.
it's so good,
It's
you
good.
know. Uh, man, yeah. I have to ask you though. We talk about records and things like that. There is a word early on that I actually had a hard time understanding. Um, what is a fax? It's like,
FAX.
I was like, as I was watching this film, I was like, you watch these movies. Like, I was saying the other day, I'm not prepared to admit that this movie is 32 years old.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
You
fax
know?
is FAX is short for facsimile.
Oh
So
my
it's
gosh.
it's communicating, at one point it's through a telephone line, data, documents usually, right? And that was a very quick way to send something
No,
across.
when was the last time you used a fax machine though? It was like,
The last time I used one, probably there was there was a college where I worked in the past 10 years, I think, that had one. And I think I was doing something, there was at that time, at least, there were certain governmental functions around like passports and
mm,
visas and those kinds of things. Or maybe I was communicating with a foreign government because I was going to do some research there or something. And like pretty much the easiest, most reliable, solid way to do it was a fax, because like you send a piece of paper, somebody gets the piece of paper, and it's right there. They don't have to log in and then check their phone and
oh
then
yeah,
get the code. And I mean, we basically, I'm not going to rail against the tech companies, at least at this point, but I had a
go
I had
for
a
it.
moment of clarity recently where I was like, they have somehow managed to turn me into a protagonist in a computer-based thriller circa 1994 just to get to my own bank account. Like I have to have three gadgets. I can't just have the password. No, no, no. That's the great thing about these movies, right? Well, you can't just have the password. You got to have the retinal scan, and you got to have the voice passport. Like that's us now. That's another thing that Sneakers did. People don't necessarily process it this way, but Sneakers showed us what our life was going to be like as everyday people, just trying to access things that were ours, that were on the other side of a barricade that tech companies put up. That's us now.
This film is so incredibly prescient, where
Totally.
it is like if we just nailing all the way down like to the computer dating. As the
Yeah.
guy who was literally swiping this morning, I was like left, right, left, 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 like
Yep.
throw the phone off the wall, and see that's like, oh my god, like they are. I mean, it's like they're calling their shots here for what's to come. And you talk about this being part of a film that's like kind of distrusting the government and stuff like that. We can also talk about like the ideas. Sorry, you said going back to '94. I'm thinking about like the Net, the Sandra Bullock film and stuff like that. There's this
Love it.
whole slew of films, right, that are just like all this information floating around, and what do we do about it?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
hysteria, this growing concern, and now it feels like we are just prisoners to the machine, right?
Well,
I
we've
mean,
kind of
I
accepted it, right? Like I love to
totally.
show one of the things I loved. I just taught this class on the Cold War in the spring, and I love to show my students the trailer of the Net, like just the trailer, and they're cracking up, right? Because literally the things that in 1995 were were things to fear in a thriller are just everyday life now. Like all your data being accessible by all of these strangers. Sort of the way that a person can be isolated by their online life taking over their quote unquote real life. I mean, it was just like one thing after another. Like, well, what will happen if they get this or they have that?
Mm,
Um, it's just sort of everyday life. So the Net is a great one for sort of looking at how quickly we went from we have to protect our privacy to like, okay, well, we still should protect our privacy, but they're giving me this free stuff, so I'm going to hand over this and that. And then, of course, something that my students in college now is, it doesn't loom large in their awareness,
mm.
but the Patriot Act just really changed everything in terms of people being, I think people feeling kind of hopeless about being able to protect their data and their private lives because, at that point the US government just came out and said like, this is all our stuff now. This is
Mm.
all ours. And they linked it to security and all of that. So, those moments are interesting to me in terms of how our consciousness changes in relation to the promises that are being made to us through and around data.
We'll say like in 1992 when this film comes out, we don't have the word influencer, right? You're talking about the idea of our private lives and things like that.
Mhm.
And now you actually have people who have gone 180 degrees the opposite direction, right?
Yeah.
Who are putting themselves, and I really worry about this, because of the social media aspect of HATM and my own scholarships really kind of emerged out of that.
Mm.
Like, how much am I living versus how much am I, putting on a show for other people? Am
Mhm.
I just giving the highlights? And, you know, I'll tell you, this is almost an invitation now to get hacked. But it's like, I feel like there's so much information out there about me already.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to figure out. If you want me, it's just like there's some guy out there or gal, whoever, who, who can come get me at this
Yeah.
point. Like, it's, you want to know what street I grew up on? That's easy to find. You want to know my favorite color, my grandfather's last name,
Right.
my mom's occupation, whatever it is,
Right.
it's there. There
All
are
the
pictures
security,
of it.
all the security questions, basically.
Oh, absolutely. And I was on those dating apps the other day, and the young lady kept asking me all these questions about my. I was like, oh, here you go. No, if it sounds Russian, swipe left. That's basically out here this close to Denver. Yeah. Um, we talked about characters in this film. There's another character though here, San Francisco. I was
Mhm.
thinking about this, right? And you're talking about the rise of tech,
Mhm.
stuff like that. Of all places, this is not a surprise that this film is set in San Francisco, right? In 1992, they're making it, I guess, in 91 or so. Can you talk a little bit about like the importance of San Francisco to this story? I mean, it's not a coincidence. They could have put this in Boise,
Yeah.
but it's here. Why San Francisco? What does San Francisco have to say, and why is that so important to how we understand tech and what these folks are trying to say in the early 90s?
Yeah. I mean, the Bay Area has long been a high tech hub. Um, and so, of course, Palo Alto, UC Berkeley, I mean, these are places where everything from physics to physics and mathematics to the railroads, even back in the 19th century, some of that wealth and power being concentrated there. You have the shipping industry
Mm-hmm.
coming through San Francisco as a major port. But the thing I would highlight mainly, and this is a book that really inspired me when it came out. Rebecca Solnit was a great Bay Area writer and thinker. She wrote a book called River of Shadows: Edward Muybridge and the Technological Wild West. And so if you go back to Leland Stanford, the namesake and founder of Stanford University, he was funding back in the mid to late 1800s what we would now call this high tech research, right? It's not a coincidence that this is where Google is founded, right? It goes back to you can look in the late 1800s. He's funding these instantaneous photography or high speed photography experiments with this really, really quirky character named Edward Muybridge. So these are if you ever seen the images of like a horse running or a woman carrying a bucket of water, and there's sort of these multiple shots.
Yeah.
Basically, he invented the technical foundations of cinema, because what he did was he had like a horse run, and he had these cameras set up with these gates, and it would trigger the image to be taken. And there were some chemistry innovations that made this possible. So he basically created like a proto film reel. What he's really trying to do is capture what motion looked like, but what they realized after that is like, but if you string these together and you make it like a zoetrope, right, or a flip book animation,
Mm-hmm.
these are the foundations of cinema, basically. So um, all of that is indicative of a massive concentration of wealth, a massive investment in technical innovation occurring
Mm-hmm.
around the Bay Area going back 150 years and more. So that continues up through, of course, the 20th century, when you have the birth of computing. You have places like UC Berkeley. The Pacific Northwest was also an important place. It's not a coincidence that Bill Gates comes out of Pacific Northwest. So it's just a deep concentration of technical workers and technological investment.
A thing I was really thinking about when I watched this is, I watched this when it first comes out, and I probably, I don't think I saw this in the theater, but I'm catching this on HBO pretty shortly afterwards. Right,
Yeah.
film opens in '69, which is not that far removed from '92. Now that I think about it,
Yeah.
but was hacking a thing like what's going on with government security, or mid-century as we start to move forward?
I mean, if my memory serves, I mean, computers are pretty big still,
Yeah,
like in the mid 20th century, big in terms of like their physical size.
right.
And I think by 1969, you have the ARPANET,
Mm.
sort of the forerunner of the internet. Um, but there are only a handful of computers hooked up to it. I would defer to some of my colleagues who know more about this, but if I had to bet like money, I would say the things that they were doing in December 1969, I don't think things were connected in that way. They also don't go into technical detail about precisely how they're getting to where they're getting. They're just like, do you want to empty Richard Nixon's bank account? Um, I mean, you do have by the early 70s, they reference this, and I talk about it in my book. The first place they go to, Cosmo and Bishop at the beginning, is the Federal Reserve electronic funds transfer station, which is in Culpeper, Virginia. That was, up and running by the early 70s and was a way of like accessing and transferring funds. But I am not aware of instances of hacking that look like. I mean, there were some early viruses and what they called phreaking to manipulate the phone system, so you could like use tones to trick it into giving you free long
Mhm.
distance phone calls. Like a lot of that stuff like was happening, but pretty early. But I am not aware of anybody doing things. And I looked a little bit into this because when I rewatched it, I was like 1969. There's no way. Uh,
Right.
and I looked a little bit into it, and I wasn't able to find anything that suggested that you could do that. And maybe that's a way of them saying they were ahead of the curve. But if it really was true that they were like a handful of computers even hooked up in this way, you can't be ahead of materiality. Like it's either
Yeah.
linked or it's not. So
Well, I think it's like one of my favorite tropes that I see in films. Like, there's always the hacker guy who does something,
yeah,
right? It's, in Spider-Man, I'm the guy in the chair, right? It's like there's always the guy who can do whatever, and it almost speaks to like the audience's ability just to take that for granted. Like, oh, okay, there's a guy out here who can do sorcery
yeah,
over here,
yeah.
and it's a necessary way to move a plot forward.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with it. And honestly, it makes me think about a colleague of mine who's a physicist. And once I went to him and I said, "So, when you watch a Marvel movie, what's your experience like? Does it make you like, does it bother you these things that they're doing because it's so inaccurate?" He's like, it is so far removed from anything like actual physics that it doesn't. I don't even relate it to physics because it's clearly fantasy.
Right.
It's clearly a fantasy, and I think this is not as far out because things that they're doing were definitely very possible soon after that. But we give it a pass because you know I've known some hackers, or I've known people who have done like white hat hackers, right? I probably have known some other kinds of hackers and not known it, but they're like, a movie about actual hacking would be the most boring 42-hour affair of failure and difficulty. And like, because sometimes you just have to have the password. And if you don't, like, that's it. I mean, obviously, it's changed a bit with some of the AI tools and all of that. But all that is to say, I'm fine with 1969 maybe being a year where they couldn't quite do that yet in with that
Yeah.
kind of speed. It's okay.
Hey, listen, it's the reason why we Indiana Jones. Otherwise, nobody wants to watch a film about archaeology, right? Because it
There you go.
is, and
No
as a
offense to the
scholar,
archaeologists, but
no, absolutely, I want to offend the archaeologists because they
yeah,
write an APA. It drives me nuts. I'm a Chicago man for life. Um, you know, uh, yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing. People sometimes ask me about, HATM or the pod and stuff like that. I'm like, I am so not interested
yeah,
in rivet counting.
yeah,
This idea is like, oh, there was no this at the Battle of that, or like, it's a story.
yeah, totally, totally.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's in the realm of belief. Yeah, I can set everything else aside.
I do wonder what school that was though, because That was a lot of snow. And I don't know nothing about Bay Area meteorology. Like
Were they
December,
in? What?
huh?
Okay, well, no, okay, well,
I,
because he says he goes to Canada
he goes to Canada, but I mean,
afterwards. So, what could are we assuming that they were in the Bay Area
no,
in
I'm not. I'm
'69?
not. I just wonder if there was a campus they had in mind, or I don't know. I mean,
Because
it's like a question that's probably no answer to, but I just looked at the architecture and I was like, where would that be? And the snow, I was like, because the snow to me is like, would it look like that ever in San Francisco? Like,
Syracuse, someplace like that, maybe
I
upstate
mean,
New York,
Michigan was pretty far
Michigan,
ahead of the curve in terms of computing, and
great
so that would
school.
make sense and easy to get to Canada. There probably would have been more snow than that in December, but they were one of the few. By the '60s, I think more places had. But anyway,
You
it's
know what? If you're
something
listening in
fun to
right
think
now
about.
and you want to like tell us like what school they go, like this is a great question. Where were they? Yeah,
Yeah.
someplace Chicago, someplace maybe. No, because they weren't in the city, right?
Uh,
It,
well,
it looked a bit. It looks right.
he goes out for pizza. Um, I don't know. The snow always just throws me off. Like, and I don't now I'm just like I don't know where this is. But I guess we could probably do a deep dive on what was happening in 1969. But again, they're not necessarily hewing to
It's gonna drive me nuts.
historical
Now
records.
I'm gonna have to know at some point in time now.
The snow works
Um,
automatically, right? Because it's like
yeah,
this is what forces them to then whatever not flip a coin, but the equivalent, right? Who's
yeah,
gonna
because
be
we can't both go out. It's
the
cold.
loser who has to go out through the snow and get the pizza. So it was good.
No, it's a good. But again, as a storyteller, as a writer, you're talking about it a little bit earlier on about hey, we've got to figure out a way to get everybody in the van,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What's the plausible reason to get people to go get to send only one guy out to go get
Yeah.
pizza? Right?
Yeah.
It's gotta be still okay. Well, that means we got to set this can't be University of Miami, right,
Yeah.
or
Right.
wherever, right? So it's those little pieces as you're constructing these stories that makes all of these small little adjustments. Just like in a lot of ways, just like when you're creating your book,
Mm.
thinking through how do I explain this to an audience in a way that makes sense, whether it's a film or someone who's reading or whatever. It's like I like thinking about the processes
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
happens there. Um, do you have favorite parts of this film?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I love anytime there is a gadget that mechanically types things. Uh, I'm a sucker for that. And I don't know if this thing really exists or not, but the thing that converts the typing to Braille for Mother,
That
I mean,
looks
that thing
so.
is so awesome. I don't know if
You know
it's
what scene I'm thinking about right now, right? Which is like where they show the screen
uh,
through Whistler's
yeah, that shot is
sunglasses, where it
A
just
plus. A plus plus. I mean,
he goes,
that's again, how can we
whoa.
show nonsensical whatever it is, computer language, right? In an interesting way. How can we make that a moment? And they so yeah, I like that part. Favorite parts, I think I just remember being like 12 and seeing this and my mind being blown when Whistler I may have called him mother just now, but Whistler says the black box is on the table. And they're like, I hate to break it to you, but you're blind, and he's like, and he sort of says, play it again. Listen, don't look, listen. That just blew my mind. Uh, God, there's so many things. I already talked about the motion capture and the heat sensors. I already talked about the door moment. The thing that actually really struck me this time rewatching was the anagram opening credits.
Yes.
They basically snuck like absurdist poetry into a big budget Hollywood movie credit. And I didn't, if I had more time, I would have actually seen if it all checked out like neatly.
Mm-hmm.
But did you see some of those phrases? It was like
Well,
unbelievable.
yeah, can I tell you? So I had forgotten about that
Yeah, me
as I
too.
sat down. Right. Um, I was thinking in some ways, and I don't remember what I was expecting. Usually, I've watched so many movies. I've got a pretty good understanding as far as what to expect on the credits.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that opening, and it's so well laid out, especially because coincides with the crossword scene, which happens at the exact same time that the
Mm-hmm.
Whistler thing is happening, which is chef's kiss, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so cool.
It's so
But I
cool.
was thinking, it was weird. You said it because I was thinking about the film poster,
Mm-hmm.
which is, in my mind, it's a really good poster.
Totally.
But I had forgotten the opening credits here. And I tweeted about this the other night. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, we're doing it. And I just shown my television. Everybody says, everybody
There's
starts
something
tweeting at me.
there's
Too many
something about
lies.
these moments too. You're talking about just wanting to hang out with these people.
Yeah.
So there's the characters themselves, but then there was and there's it's also specific to that era before everybody had a phone, right? So if you were hanging
Mm-hmm.
out with people, there was a landline, but like nobody was getting a call on their cell phone. So you could have these extended periods of time where you're just like interacting. And that moment where they're playing Scrabble and Redford's like C-Tech astronomy, and they just dump the board and everybody starts pitching in and trying to figure it out. There are there are aspects of that are, I think, probably a little too neat with the great score and all of that, where it's like, okay,
Sure.
and then he figures this out, he figures this out. I don't care because I love it. I'm nostalgic about it.
It works.
And it's well done. It's great. And it's just so fun. But what I was gonna say was there are early '90s movies that have that quality that you talked about, where it's the characters and the actors, but it's also something about late at night. I mean, some of those scenes in like A Few Good Men, for instance, where they're trying to figure out their strat, and it's just like, I want to have Chinese takeout with them at 1 a.m. I want to be riding on yellow legal pads. I want to be like breaking my brain trying to figure out how to win the unwinnable case. It's just, you just want, it's because it's like college plus a party plus plus a brain teaser plus, it's just like, it's just so compelling. It's so compelling. The lighting, everything that they do,
They
this early
sell this idea
capacity.
of like working late at night, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They do this on the West Wing. Like I want to,
Yes.
right? I want to live at DC and be awake at 2 a.m. Like
It's
all the other offices are closed, but mine is open and I'm doing the work with my friends because we've got to figure out the thing
Yep.
because this is who we are and this is what we do.
Yep. The West Wing is the
Otherwise,
apex of that.
thank you, right? Like I want to move. I want to live in DC like during Christmas time because I want to go to a ball and you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Now they'd all be sitting around their phones scrolling,
Yeah. I mean,
right? I won't be that guy, but
it would be different. Well, then that's the thing, right? It's like, I'm not bringing this up to say like this time is worse or that was better, even though that was better in certain ways. But there's something
always
specific about that moment because it wasn't completely detechnologized. There was some technology, right? It was coming in. So there's a mix of analog and digital in these interesting ways. And there are reasons why so many of us hopped on the internet. It was amazing. It was like there's a reason why it
drug.
exploded. And it wasn't just forced on us. There were things about it that were so cool. And so I think going back to that time where the tools were tools in the context of our life rather than our life sort of is fit into the tools, whether work
Mhm.
life, personal life, or whatever. And, I'm not taking a position on that one way or another, but like that feeling is something that people desire. And even people that are born digital now, have you heard about this startup? I think it's called No Place. It's being sold as
No,
MySpace for Gen Z. So it's a stripped
no.
down social media platform that really sort of tries to get back to something that the internet had before that it's lost as all of the platforms basically become each other and become all the same. I haven't been on it. I'm not on any social media, so I don't really know like what it offers. I was definitely on MySpace, and when MySpace started, I was all over it. I loved it.
Did you have the music playing on your MySpace
Yeah, I did.
page?
I used to make music back then too, so I used it
Oh,
for
okay.
that to sort of like it was useful for musicians. And like I mean all that stuff, CD Baby, like all those sites that like made it easy to be an independent musician. That stuff was great. It was great.
Yeah, it felt like a different world, and it's like here we are, guys, like nostalgia, waxing poetic about a time. God,
But I think to
25 years
understand the
ago,
movie, right, to understand how this movie works and why it works on us,
right?
these things are true. Like you can take a value position one way or another, like innovation's always good. let's let AI take over. It's better than humans. You can take any of those positions you want. The things that you can't argue about is that human consciousness has been shifted through these technologies being embedded in so many layers of our awareness and our social relations. And so a movie that comes out before that shift hits people with brains that were built in that environment. And then even people who see it now are seeing this moment that no matter how much money you have, no matter how smart you are, you cannot get back to. The world has
Oh,
changed.
thank you.
You
Thank you for
cannot
saying that.
experience it if you wanted to because it's not there anymore. So that's in order to understand how this movie works and hits us. I think that's the thing you just got to understand.
Okay, thank you so much for saying that because as a guy, I'm tail end of Gen X, right? And I always felt like I was like I was. The Zennial thing is probably more accurate for me because I never felt like I belonged to the millennial. I sure as heck wasn't cool enough to be Gen X, right? And you go back and watch this film now. I remember watching it as a kid. It's like, okay, cool, this is what's going on. And now you look through this film as like this nostalgic, gaze.
Yeah.
Because they, in this film, have a sense of what's coming. We know
Yeah.
what's coming to them.
Right.
Everything's about to change. And, it's not just that. We're about to change too, right? Like as young men and so forth, like we're about to go through this growth and so forth. And I love what you say about this idea that there's no going back here.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. There's not.
So now you watch this film, you're not just enjoying it. It's like you were imparting that feeling you had when you were 15, 16, 17, whatever, in the early 90s,
Yeah.
The other part I wanted to ask you about, because I want to come back to this later on, I can't not talk about the end with James Earl Jones. What do you want? What do you want?
Yeah.
And River Phoenix, I just want a number. I mean, just it's the best line.
Probably an HR violation at this point, but in 92, it was just, it was just sweet.
I get the sense that the federal government, at least according to this film, was committing a lot of violations. This entire thing is like that's the minimalist thing, right?
Yeah. But it's brilliant writing. I mean, it's just like
it's great. It's fun and it's so true to character too.
Totally.
He's clueless, and she's like, "You can have anything in the world you want. All you want's my number. Here you go." I mean, it helps that he looks like River Phoenix, right?
Yeah.
Are there parts of this film that drive you nuts?
I wouldn't say drive me nuts. There are parts of it that are, there's some tricks, right, that everybody used back then, right? When they first haul Robert Redford in and they give the resume of everybody in his crew, like that was a thing that you did in movies in the 80s and the 90s, right? And you just run it down. It's kind of cheating from a writing perspective, but
Here's everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Here's who they are. This would take so long to actually do it through drama and dramatic choices. We're just going to give you the info. But I mean, I just love it so much. But as for terms of what drives me crazy, I don't think there's anything that drives me crazy. I think there are things there are some moments that I kind of have double consciousness as I watch because I'm like loving it. And then I'm like, I wonder how someone who hadn't seen this before would see it. Someone who's like 22 or 25 or 12, right? Who like was my age when I watched it. There are some moments that are a little, they're just very, very Hollywood. They're very, very sort of like, the score comes in, just like, oh, what about this? And it gets a little stylized in a sort of mainstream way, but it doesn't keep me from just like laughing out loud and muttering to myself, I love this fucking movie as I'm watching it. Like,
it's so
none
good.
of it really gets in the way.
Thank you. Can I give you my hot take? The thing I was picking up on here. I don't know. And I hate to criticize this film because you saw my email when you suggested this film. I was like, absolutely, let's go. Right. Yeah. I was all in. Sometimes people suggest films and I'm like, hey, how about no? But are we sure that Robert Redford and Mary McDonnell really like the chemistry there? Is it romantic enough? Do you get the sense? I went back and did the thing. God, and I feel bad because he's 55 in this film, and I had to know. It's like she's 40.
Okay.
I don't care about the age gap. Well, you're a
Yeah. Yeah.
consenting adult. I don't care,
Yeah.
right? But I was trying to figure out why is this not? I didn't feel like there was any heat between the two of them.
Hmm.
I don't know. Maybe that's just me reading too much into it. The film works. It's fine. She's constantly like, we're not getting back together. It's clear that they are, but the characters never kiss.
Yep. Yep.
You
So
know, there's some
is this a
hugging.
question about them deciding to make that the story between those two, or were you just like, I don't even see enough sparks to believe that they ever would have gotten together?
Yeah, you know what? I think when I was younger,
Yeah.
I would have was like, okay, cool, right? But going now watching the film was like, is there enough? Like watching Battlestar Galactica, right? Watching her in that with James
Mm,
Edward almost like, yeah, I'm in, right?
yeah.
I buy this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I do like the idea of like this doesn't have to be a love story, right? There can
Yeah.
be like an affection there. We're citing this, but this is about something else.
Hmm.
If anything, this is the love story between Cosmo and Bishop, and
Oh,
Cosmo feeling
totally.
like he's the jilted lover,
Totally. Yeah. That's why he doesn't
right?
kill him. That's why he doesn't. I mean, he frames him, but it's not really to send him to jail. It's kind of to get him back on the criminal side. So he's trapped
Oh
with
yeah,
Cosmo and he can't go back to like
yeah.
a legal life. Um, so is the question like if I feel that way about it too? I mean, I don't see. I think there's one moment. So I'll give a counterpoint to your hot
Go
take.
for it.
There's one moment. It's not heat so much, but it is feeling. And Mary McConnell is just like.
Yeah,
I mean, Mary McDonald. She's just great.
I love her.
There's a moment where he comes to the apartment. He's just sort of survived the getting knocked out twice situation. Comes in and she's cleaning him up. And he's like, I'm sorry. And she's like, yeah, yeah, it's okay. And he stops. He's like, I'm sorry. And she sort of like becomes unguarded for a minute.
Yeah,
That 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 makes me believe there was a connection there, that there was some intimacy there. But to your point, that's it. I mean, that's kind of the moment. There's another moment where you can see she's a bit charmed by him when they get to um there's a moment maybe around the Scrabble scene or something. She's like, "Oh no, I'm fine." Oh no, not Scrabble scene. It's by the end when James Earl
yeah.
Jones is giving people stuff. She's like, "Oh no, I'm good. I'm fine." Like
Like this is the ride I'm on.
but um, but no, I get you. I hear you. I have what's maybe a hotter take. Now this is taking it into very
Let's
speculative
roll.
territory,
Go
but
for it.
also
Let's speculate.
but also there's some evidence for it. Okay.
We don't even need evidence. We can conjecture. Let's go.
Um, One thing that feels really good at the end of the movie is that the black box goes to the NSA, but Redford has removed the microchip from it, so the
Hmm.
U.S. government won't have it. Do we trust Redford's character with the chip, or is he going to rebuild the black box and do entrepreneurial things, shady things? Will he be able to resist? Like he just holds it up. Like
I
where does
got
it
it.
go from
Right.
there?
See, here's the thing. I think Redford is okay. Here's what I worry about. I worry about Redford leaving it laying around, and then like Aykroyd getting his hands on it and start like Aykroyd and Whistler start
Doing
playing
good.
around with it. Let's help. Let's help out. Oh wait, towards the end of the film, don't we see that exact thing where they're like, where they're talking about like the Republican Party lost all of its money,
This
and there was
this
all
this uh I read that as, oh, that's interesting, because I read that at, now you're feeding into my speculative reading.
absolutely.
I read
Let's
that
go.
as the NSA was granting the wish of Whistler, who wanted goodwill and peace on Earth. The
Oh, I hadn't thought
NSA
about
got
that.
that done.
I love that line. It's like
Yeah, yeah,
with
yeah.
the United States government that we don't do that. You
Yeah, yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. That's all we do. Yeah. So,
James Earl Jones just owning the few minutes of screen time he's in this film.
oh yeah.
He's
I mean,
just like,
he's a giant. And then, this is of course a preview of him then being in the Jack Ryan movies, the Harrison Ford Jack Ryan movies, right? Where he
oh yeah,
is all time great, OG CIA dude, like
Oh
Greer.
my god. Have you watched the new series with Krasinski and Wendell
Oh yeah,
Pierce as Greer?
oh
What
yeah.
did you think about Wendell Pierce's Greer?
Oh, I love it. I mean,
I was so in.
love it. Yeah, it's funny too because I he's so the bunk to me from The Wire that like it took me a minute to
Yeah.
adjust to him
Yeah,
being
no,
Greer.
he didn't do it, but yeah, but
And
yeah,
and I think the way that they did it too, where he's like grumpy and gruff and sort of like you don't know what his
yeah,
backstory is, but once he actually like some action happens and he's in it, you're like, oh, this guy is like fierce. Like
yeah.
he's not athletic, he's not rowing on the Charles River every morning or whatever, but he
But
is
he's seen some
cold
shit.
blooded
Yeah. Well,
when he
okay.
needs to be.
So the thing I like about Wendell Pierce, right, especially like him. Welcome to Jason and Brian talk about Jack Ryan.
Oh yeah.
Let's go. He doesn't try to recreate James Earl Jones,
No, he
right? He's
doesn't.
just gonna do his own thing. But he also has the screen presence, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
He's gotta have enough. I don't have the right word
Yeah.
to counterbalance Jack Ryan kind of doing his own thing. And Krasinski, I liked a lot.
Hmm.
Uh, I, I we haven't done a Jack Ryan on these podcasts yet, and I'm dying to do Red October because
Oh
like
yeah. Classic.
Cold War submarines, Connery
Classic.
is a God, yeah, absolutely. No, I love Pierce in this in that, and I love Jones here. He's so good.
He's so good.
Um, I want to ask you about this. We have this section here. My friend Lauren Lesab Shepard, a fellow UNC book author, when she came up with this idea of like what the Florida and what happens if we set sneakers in Florida? Like, do things radically change? What happens when we go from the Bay Area to Florida for this movie? And you can set this film in any time period, by the way.
Okay. But so I'm thinking that it gets a little more ridiculous, maybe a lot more
Sounds right.
ridiculous. And it gets a little almost Die Hard 2-y with some meteorological stuff. So something about a storm, like there's a I don't know, like some way of either manipulating the weather, or I mean, it would just be a completely different movie because, as you know, when you go to Florida, everything changes. So,
That's home. Yeah, absolutely.
so I think there might be something related to some kind of storm, impending storm, and a heist, and there being that's kind of as far as I got because I think from there it gets really, really weird. But I think the other thing I think about with Florida, and maybe you can help me with
Mm-hmm.
this,
Please.
but Florida is, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's like 2 feet of dirt and then you hit water, right?
Correct.
So the infrastructure is different, right? Where like fiber optic cables and you've got satellites and phone line, like all that stuff would have to be configured a little bit differently in Florida. I think that could change some things. And you've also got the angle of, rather than being the Bay Area and that like tech hub kind of thing, you've got a lot of really rich kind of environments in terms of like technology and politics. It's like South Florida and the Cuba connection. You've got all the
See,
amusement parks where you could have some really, really wacky stuff happen.
oh,
So
you could do it. I'm constantly shocked. So we do all these watch parties stuff like that. We don't see Florida in enough films, and it's such a weird place. It's beautiful.
yeah.
You know, I'm a Florida historian. Like
Mhm.
I've been trying to make sense of it for the last 10 years. I can't, but I don't know, man. It's easy to make fun of. Like being from Kentucky originally. Thank God for Florida because Florida like came on this idea of Florida man is completely like no one makes fun of my people anymore. It's great. Now they make fun of my children's people.
Yeah.
My older son was born in West Palm Beach. So for those of you who are wanting to hack, I can give you his birthday later on. But that actually brings me to a segue here about your own work, because I do want to talk about your book, which I found absolutely fascinating. In talking about this, you started, you're like, I'm just here to see some pictures. I'm like, pictures of what, Brian? And then you're like, you're going into Iron Mountain, and I was thinking about how Florida would be the worst place in the world to
Yeah.
store as a repository because
Right.
of humidity, climate change, saltwater intrusion, all this kind of stuff. Uh, and whenever we were first talking, I was thinking about this film Greenland. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you seen it or not.
I've seen it now.
It's one of those apocalyptic films where they're trying to get to Greenland because
Right.
there's a meteor, and I think you would dig it. Gerard Butler is in
Mm-hmm.
this movie.
Mm-hmm.
He's good in it.
He can be
But I want to
good.
come back to this.
Yeah.
He can be good. Like,
Yeah.
okay, please. What's the film he's done? Den of Thieves.
Den of Thieves. That's what I was gonna say. He was great in that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's diet heat. I love it. Like, give
Yeah.
me another one.
Yeah.
All right, I want to ask you about this.
Mm-hmm.
Your book's all about data storage and record keeping and stuff like that. So, talk to me a little bit about this. Like, what's the deal here? What's the driving force behind? You can explain your book better than I can. So, talk to me a little bit about how we're tying in your book here to this for this particular film. Like, what's the gist here as far as data storage and why we need to care about record keeping?
Yeah. So yeah, as you were saying, the book opens with me going to Iron Mountain, the Iron Mountain National
So
Data
good,
Center, and there's
outstanding name for a place,
yeah,
right?
all
Iron
kinds of stuff
Mountain,
down there, right?
right?
Every format you could imagine of storing data, and the heart of my concerns was a facility that was at the time owned and operated by Bill Gates for his company Corbis.
Right.
And so he was preserving like tens of millions of photographs in this 10,000 square foot freezer, basically, and digitizing some of them. Um, and the consultant that helped him build this uh, place in a former limestone mine cavern said that the temperature and humidity control would preserve the photos for 10,000 to 15,000 years. And I remember first learning about that and thinking, why would anybody want to preserve anything for 10,000 or 15,000 years? And so what I started to do was look at the history of attempts to preserve data or
Mhm.
media artifacts permanently. And that took me into a territory where I'm reading about human beings' relationship with the material world, our relationship to our own mortality. Because what I'd often find these very like History Channel type takes where it's like, human beings have always preserved since the beginning of time. The ancient Egyptians. I was like, wait a second. The Egyptians did not do this. The Egyptians did
Right.
not do what we're doing right now. They did something very, very different. So Americans are the most prolific preservers of data ever. And so my question was, how did it become that way? And a lot of it has to do with us believing that keeping data safe will keep us safe, that keeping data, for lack of a better term, alive will in some way keep a trace of us alive even after we die. That creating backups of things that we value will protect them against all the things that destroy material objects on Earth. And then you've got outer space, of course, being placed. So with sneakers, part of what is going on is we have invested these technological systems and these stores of data, these data banks, they used to call them. Eventually, they become data centers with the power to protect us against our enemies, the secrecy, right? The secrecy, the
Mhm.
encryption. And encryption is, of course, an architectural metaphor, right? Because it refers to crypt, which is something that's underground and buried and bunkerfied, if you will, or bunkerized, I guess would be the
I
way to
hadn't
put
even
it.
thought about that. Yeah, go on.
So, so what sneakers is doing, what sneakers, the MacGuffin, I guess, or whatever sneakers would be, is that this black box, which supposedly has the computing power, the mathematical power to decrypt anything. So now what happens is the data that we thought kept us safe now threatens to become vulnerable, making us vulnerable, right? So that taps into those mortal fears. And I think, there's a really inspiring media historian named Lisa Geidelman who's written about this. She wrote some stuff with Jonathan Auerbach about microfilm and talked about microfilm having this double capacity to both be the thing that protects us and saves us when it's like espionage on behalf of the United States, but also if it can be hid inside of like the heel of a shoe and it's the nuclear secrets, it's also the thing that renders us deeply, deeply vulnerable to the Russians, quote unquote, right?
Right.
So, so sneakers really like plays upon those psychological investments, those feelings of vulnerability as a person and individually, right? Because that's Marty's thing too, right? Marty's life is destroyed if the information about his past gets out. It's all about controlling information on an individual level and then as like a national collective. And then people who, of course, want to take that information and become powerful. Cosmo's got some uh, misguided ideas about like the material infrastructure required to operate the internet and the immaterial world of information as he sees it. But that was a common misconception, really, up until I don't know 10, 12 years ago, when the New York Times started reporting about data centers, using more electricity than small towns, and like, oh, this is all very material. Actually, it's not in the cloud up in the sky. So
I want to ask you. Well, you said that the United States we store data like nobody's business,
yeah,
right? Like that makes sense. Where does this come from? Is what is this American obsession with keeping records? And we say this knowing that I've got records here on Facebook and Instagram, and like the whole world's like access to my stuff. So where's this coming from? This idea is like we've got to keep all this stuff because Gates went and bought these records; they were already out there.
yeah.
What's this fascination?
Well, part of it was practical. If you go back to the mid 19th century and the expansion of the railroad, basically what happens is you have the American economy, especially after the Civil War, is industrializing. So now you have extraction of raw materials, you have processing and manufacturing, selling of the goods can actually happen in like far flung places. They don't have to all be in the same town, right? Because the railroad allows us magnificently speedy transfer of things. Well, once you have that, you also have the sort of birth of the modern American corporation by the 1880s, these massive bureaucratic systems with an army of lawyers to boot right after the Santa Clara decision makes corporations into persons. And so, in order for corporations and corresponding to that, the United States government, which also really becomes a federal system after the Civil War in terms of being something that we would recognize as a federal system, you have an explosion of records because people actually can't keep in their heads the things that they need to have. So you need a bureaucracy. Drew Gilpin Faust, the historian, has this great book, This Republic of Suffering, about
Mm,
in the wake of the Civil War, all of the basically government agencies that were built out in order to administer the veterans benefits and just sort of creating, the federal bureaucracy that we know. So it begins, the United States, in order to become an industrial powerhouse, sort of had to do it. It became possible because of cheap wood pulp paper. There are all these factors that sort of make it possible. Then by the time you get to the 1910s and the 1920s, there's incredible anxiety because a lot of these records were printed on cheap paper. A lot of them were being stored in ways that were, as you can imagine, not the optimal conditions for preserving these things that you might need 5, 10 years from now. And then you get to the 1930s and the New Deal, and there's actually federal legislation that requires government agencies and corporations to preserve certain classes of records. So we get all of these retention schedules. You have to save these records legally in case you face litigation. So by the time you get to the 50s, you have companies in New York City where most of the office space that they're renting at exorbitant rates is dedicated to just holding records. So then you get highway system, you get the ability to sort of outsource that record storage, that secure data storage services to companies like Iron Mountain, which was founded in the 50s,
mm-hmm.
saving money in office space, et cetera. So it's a combination of, as I said, practicality, the human brain not really being built to hold all of that, and then the investment in technology and automation and just our entanglement with what I end up calling the data complex, which is our reliance upon these technological and database systems really to operate our daily life. It expands and expands because every time there's a threat to the security of the country or to whatever some segment of the populace holds dear, it increases that anxiety. And one of the ways that we historically as Americans have stabilized ourselves is to create a backup plan, and backup plans mean backup documents, and backup documents mean backup documents in multiple places and multiple formats, with multiple telecommunication systems linking them. So it just expands and expands and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we never actually feel safe. We just feel more anxious in different ways, and we just build the data complex out some more.
You say this, my laptop crashed while I was writing my master's thesis.
Oh,
I lost one paragraph. I had,
yeah, yeah.
dude.
Good.
If there is a higher power, I used up every last bit of whatever
Yeah.
on that one thing because I lost everything else in the laptop
Oh, wow.
for some reason.
How was that saved? I don't understand.
God only knows.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I know that I lost a paragraph, half page, something like that. It was, and it
Wow.
was recent, right? Like, so I was, oh, man, and I had that thing almost done, and oh god, talk about terrifying. And like people ask,
Good.
oh, why don't you save to the cloud and this, that, and the other? And you talk about this in the book. And now that I'm in the process of writing my own book, I'm like, I've got stuff saved everywhere.
Yeah.
And the other problem, Brian, is like we see this in memes all the time. I don't have another password in me. I can't do it. People are like, oh, we have, the whoever, we have your passwords. I'm like, can you tell me what they are? I need them now.
Yeah.
God, I get into an app on my phone and they ask me for password. I'm like, that's why I have the app,
I know.
so I don't have to have a password. This is the one place I shouldn't have a password.
Well, and some of the things that
And
are
of
being
course,
protected, it's like, honestly, what is the worst thing that could happen if somebody gets a hold of my Verizon app? I mean, what are they going to do to me? They're going to send an iPhone 15 to my house and I'll get charged for it? Like, why
go
is
nuts, man.
security? What's going to
Listen,
happen?
I am a historian working for the federal government. There's not that much you can take from me to begin with. Can you just make my life easier? I want to ask you though about the creation of this book though, because one of the things I really like to talk about is like, where did the formation of this book come from? Like, and then how do you interest? I love when authors do this. We're in Iron Mountain with you, like right from the very beginning. But like, how does this book take shape, and how do you research this idea? Like, because none of this felt very intuitive to me. I was like, how are you getting there, intellectually as you were writing this? Like, so can you talk us a little bit about where this book came from, and then like how you went around constructing it?
Well, I was in graduate school. I was doing my PhD, and I was taking a class called Photography and After with this amazing, brilliant scholar in history of art. But she did her PhD in rhetoric at Berkeley and did a lot of work on media and time-based art. Really, Chris Paulson is her name. So she was a big mentor to me, and that was the class in which I wrote a paper about Bill Gates's Corbis facility. And so but she had us reading essays going back to the beginnings of photography. So we were reading things written about Daguerre and Niepce and, Edgar Allan Poe writing about seeing a daguerreotype for the first time.
Oh, this is cool.
Oliver Wendell Holmes, who had invented a stereoscopic viewer, he has this essay called The Stereoscope and Stereograph that was published in the Atlantic Monthly. And he's saying, eventually we will have the Imperial Stereographic Library where you can go and look at a 3D image of anything, the Parthenon, the Great Wall of China, herds of buffalo on the plains. And once we have that, you can just tear the Parthenon down and kill all the buffalo and get rid of this. We have the image of it. We don't need the real thing anymore. So there are all these like sort of strange ideas where preservation, and photography was being talked about a lot as a preservative technology, right? It's taking something from the flow of time that otherwise is going to decay and change, and it's freezing it like Han Solo, right? So that it's eternal. And they didn't know yet that photographs decay too yet. And also photographs at the beginning were made out of metal. So they actually were pretty durable.
They don't know anything about carbonite. You know,
So,
so
so part of the reason probably why when you look at the book, the stuff doesn't seem immediately connected is because the way that I conceived of it, put preservation at the center. But the way that scholarly knowledge has tended to be produced, at least up until the time I was writing the book, uh, was that you can read about architectural preservation, you could read about food preservation, you could read about preservation of film and photography, you could read about conservation in art and other sort of museum materials. You could not read anything that connected those practices. But I was in an interdisciplinary program. So all I had to do was ask a good question and then answer it. And I was allowed to go wherever I needed to go. So I
that's
read about
awesome.
taxidermy. I read about food canning. I read about uh, preservation of historical architecture. I read about anything related to preservation, I read about. And as it turns out, these things are related in the ways that people preserve a photograph. You know, you have gelatin that's in there. Well, guess what? That's something we put in our food too, and so that's related to like refrigeration, all that. So anyway, that was sort of the beginnings of it conceptually. But still, it's really not clear how this is going to become a book that anybody's going to read or buy. So that was my dissertation, was really writing, a chapter on the Crypt of Civilization, a chapter on the Westinghouse time capsule, these projects that were precursors to Corbis, really the first projects where people said, we are going to preserve microfilm permanently. And we know that because they've just carried out the first government scientific studies from 1929 to 1938 that prove that these things can be preserved that long. And then, of course, going into the Cold War, looking at the bunkers, the securitization, the expansion of the data complex. So I spent 5 years researching, going to archives, writing the dissertation, taking courses, and then writing dissertation. I finished in 2014, and then I worked on it for a few more years, and then I sent a proposal to UNC Press, and there was interest, but they're like, this is really two books, because I was doing some other things in the book when it was in that form. They're like, write this one or this one. So then I reformatted the proposal again, narrowed it down to the one thing, sent it again. The acquisitions editor was interested, but the executive editor wasn't convinced. So then I don't know.
Oh man.
And somewhere in here too, I'd also been like, why don't I try to get a literary agent and make this like a trade book? So I had already like sort of reconceptualized it that way. That wasn't happening. I had some good contacts with some agents that didn't work, but it gave me a different idea. But I was so kind of like, I don't know. At that point, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I am just going to stop. I'm gonna stop, and then I'm just gonna write this book the way I want to write it, right? Because the head
Thank you.
editor at UNC Press, the executive editor, had asked all these really great questions that I would need to answer if I was going to publish with them, and I didn't have the answers. And I was like, I don't even know that I want to find those answers. And so I was like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through the manuscript, and I am going to I'm going to copy and then paste into a new document all of the moments in the manuscript that feel the way that I want the entire book to feel. And I think it added up to about 12 pages. And I was like,
Oh,
that's what I'm
Jesus
starting from.
Christ.
I'm starting from this.
Dude, I was like, go, and then you're at 12. Oh,
It went from
jeez.
250 to 12. And I was like,
You're scary, man.
this is how I want this whole book to be. And I was like, I'm going to write it for me. I don't know what's going to happen. Is it going to get published? Is not, but like, I have to figure out what this book is. And the good thing is, as these literal years are passing, Elon Musk is doing all kinds of weird shit. Jeff Bezos is doing all kinds of weird shit. And these things become the later chapters that were not a part of the dissertation because it hadn't happened yet.
Right.
So then here I am, I'm writing, I'm doing this sort of like almost like lyric essay style for a good amount of the stuff. Because I still have all the research, I'm just putting in a different vibe. And I think it's about a year later or something. And one day I'm writing and I'm like, I don't even remember what those questions were that the editor asked me. Like those questions that I was like, I do not, I was like, what were those? So I like go and I search in my email and I pull them up, and I had answered all of them.
Are you kidding me?
So then I was like, okay, let me rewrite the book proposal again. So I wrote the book proposal again. I sent it back, and they were like, this is it.
That's awesome.
And then I was, off to the races. So still had some more writing to do. Peer review process. I had some moments where they're like, read this book, add this, do that. But it was a really fun ride and challenging. And then there was a pandemic, so that changed the
I
timeline.
heard.
But it also meant that you know during the pandemic, I just got up really early and I wrote every day for a long time.
Were you in the position where you were worried about like tenure or anything like that, where you had like a ticking clock in your head, where you were concerned? Was that affecting or anything along those lines too?
No, no, I had the opposite, and I think that's part of what led this book to be what it was. I had positions that were very good positions, but I had two positions in a row that were at colleges that don't have a tenure system. So they would do these like really long term contracts. You'd still go from like assistant professor to associate professor or whatever, but they were like, if you want to write poems and have that be your that element, that research element, if you want to write peer reviewed articles, if you want to write a book that's on UNC Press, if you want to write a book that's on Grey Wolf, whatever you want to do, just do it. But do something that has some kind of impact. Do something that people like care about. So that was it was a huge gift to spend like several years and in faculty positions where I felt economically, just like job wise, secure. But I
That's
was
awesome.
able to write the way that I wanted to write, and nobody cared. Nobody cared what it looked like. They were like, "Oh, got published there, great."
All right, you just said a thing I have to ask you about. Greg Wolf.
Yeah.
What are you referencing?
Well, Grey Wolf is just like one of the coolest publishers of nonfiction on the
Oh,
face.
really?
Oh, Grey
Okay.
Wolf is based in Minneapolis. Yeah,
Okay.
they're a
Dude,
publisher.
I went to school in Minnesota and I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
Now I feel
they
like dumb.
publish like there's a book called Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankin.
Okay.
They
Okay.
yeah, so they've just done some things that really push the boundaries in terms of experimenting with form. But they published this book by Kevin Young, who's the poetry editor of the New Yorker, but he's written nonfiction books. He wrote this massive book called The Gray Album on the Blackness of Blackness, and it just goes all over the place from jazz to hip hop to T.S. Eliot writing letters in like basically imitating like blackface minstrels with Ezra Pound and them having these nicknames. I mean, it's like all, but it's formally, it's just incredible. So I think for my money, Grey Wolf is just like one of the coolest. It's just one of the
I gotta check him
coolest
out.
presses. Yeah, and I have some friends who've published with them, and they just do things that are just really really rad.
All right, we've been talking about books. What are three books that have influenced you? Like, who do you like? We've talked. You've name dropped a few of them, and
Yeah,
it's like I love talking about other people's work and professors, especially you're talking about the art history.
yeah.
Dude, I love hearing stories about people who like lift other people up, who were like the awesome professor.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm so glad you did. Um, Give me three books that you dig.
Yeah, so I mentioned one, Rebecca Solnit, River of Shadows.
Yeah.
That was huge. She is just a brilliant essayist and thinker. That was one.
All right.
Another that influenced me, especially when you're talking about going to these facilities, was Tom Vanderbilt's book Survival City. Subtitle is like Adventures in the Atomic Ruins of America. It's really good. And then one that really inspired me. I don't know that I didn't do precisely what that book was doing, but Richard Rhodes' Making of the Atomic Bomb um, is just really one of my favorite books of all time.
Let me ask you this. Here's my penultimate question for you. You, sir, have just turned over the crypt machine, the black box. What are you asking for in return? Are you asking for Winnebago? What are you going for?
That's a
The
good
Winnebago's the
question.
great line.
That's a good question. Oh, um, hmm. What am I asking for in return? I guess this means I must have a nice life. If it takes me a minute to think about it. Um,
I prepped you for this. I gave you this question last night, and you're still thinking on this. This is good.
I know. So I think what I would want is a. I think I probably would do some kind of. Oh man, that's so nerdy.
This is a history in movies podcast. You have found your people.
I'm not really like into cars, and like I don't know. I oftentimes I look at my stuff. I'm like, how do I have less stuff, not more of it? So
Sure.
I don't really know. I think there's just one. Here's what I would want. I would want a small library, and I can tell you a couple of them, but there'd be several first edition books. Um, Gene Toomer's Kane from the Harlem Renaissance. It would all be related to like that time.
Okay. Go
And
for it. I'm
another,
I'm in.
the first one I think about is there was an anthology called Fire that came out in the 20s that Langston Hughes was a part of putting together. It's really rare. It's really expensive if you want to get. It's like a magazine basically. So I'd want that. I'd want a first edition of the Weary Blues with the Miguel Covarrubias illustration on it. I mean, those are kind of like the extravagant things that I think about. I don't know. I mean, there's something rolling around in my head like about a vintage Land Rover, but like practically, like, do I really need that? Like, you know. So
Absolutely, you do.
what's
One
that?
thousand. Absolutely, you do.
Okay, so let's go there. Let's just go there then. Here's what it would be. Here's what it would be. It would be a roughly 1972 Land Rover that is like the most mechanical thing you've ever seen. And by mechanical, I mean you can just like open it up and just like spray out all the mud with the hose. There's
Oh
no
yeah.
there's no Bluetooth. There's no like $200 tire pressure sensor that's going to break and need to be replaced. Even though the tire pressure and the tires are actually fine, there's none of that. Like when it breaks, it just breaks and then you get like a wrench and another tool and you fix it. Uh that would probably that would I was trying to find something else, but honestly, like out of all the extravagant things that I think about getting, it is something like that. It is like a box of steel with four wheels that I can go anywhere in. It's not fast, but it's not going to get stuck in the snow or mud, and it's just like a big toy. That's what it would probably be. And my wife, if she watches this, is going to roll her eyes, as are my kids. But that's my role, right? Like that's what I do for them.
No,
I
no. Listen, like, maybe they could ride along.
Yeah, they would like it if I actually had it. So yeah.
Listen, all I'm going for is like a Detroit style pizza with the Mexican Coke, and I'm happy. Like that's all I need. Maybe it's just because I'm starving right now. All right, I got one last question.
Yeah.
Um, is Sneakers a history movie?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's I don't know. I think more about I think it's psychological. I think it uses history to explore psychological terrain. Because what it's so much of what it's dealing with um and Dan Aykroyd's character is sort of like the gravitational core of this is fantasy and also the line between what we know and don't know and the fear that what we know is actually not something we know and how much uncertainty there is in historical knowledge. That's what I think. It's pulling at those threads. So there's always a reality. There's always the universe of established facts and available information. And we don't really know, but like some scholars like Peter Gallison, who was a historian of science at Harvard, I'm not sure if he's still there or not. He estimated that like 95% of all the information in the world is classified. So, there's this iceberg under the surface of things that we don't have access to. And so I think Sneakers is a film that sort of does this, right? It's dipping into this realm in a way that's completely speculative or that is otherwise seen as conspiracy theory. and it comes back into the realm of the quote unquote real world or actual facts. And then it tells a story that like is like, what does Redford say at one point to Cosmo? I don't care. At some point, he's like, I just want to live, right? Like, I
Thank
want to
you.
survive. I don't want to be worried about getting thrown in jail or hit over the head. Like, I don't care about your big plans and dreams. Like, I just want to have a life, which is what happens in the firm, too. Not to bring it back to the firm, but like in the firm, he's like, I just want my life back. And that's what this whole thing is about.
No, I love it. I really want to take this movie and put it into a whole other pod where we talk about spy movies or the deep state or anything else. So please come back to do
I
those.
would love to.
Like,
Can I show you one more thing before we sign
absolutely,
off?
please.
So when we decided to do this, I was like, I thought I owned this movie, and I guess I don't. So then I was like, well, let me get it from the library, the college library, and they didn't have a copy of it. So I was like, well, let me request the interlibrary loan. I don't know how long it's going to take. And eventually, the DVD came in, and you see the little bit of the cover there,
Wow.
interlibrary loan. But what they did have, which made me say I need to get the DVD on interlibrary loan. What they did have at the library was this.
Dude. Okay. That you know what you need to do? Steal that. You need to steal that.
I mean, sorry to do this to you. I should warn you if I'm ever going to make you this nostalgic. You see the please
Look
rewind
at
on it?
that. Oh man. That hold on. I gotta do this. I'm sorry. You gotta hold it up. That is awesome.
It's got the FBI warning on it because
Oh,
can't be copying tapes.
you've got to bring this to your students.
I am going to find. I own some movies on DVD. I have a working VCR at home actually as well.
You've got to.
Yeah, so I'll get my own copy of this on this format, and it'll be a prized possession.
Yeah, I think you've just set something off, dude. Right, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I was so looking forward to this conversation. Like, I can't tell you, I was looking for. I've never talked to this guy. I just know that this is going to go cool, and this has been awesome. So, thank you so very much. This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.